Hey everybody, this is Chuck. I just wanted to spend a little time talking about some of the things that I've learned in evangelism and just five very simple places, if you will, or methods of helping people come to know Christ. You know, Jesus in Matthew 4:19 says, "Follow me and I'll make you become fishers of men." Now, one of the natural byproducts of us becoming like Christ, being his disciple, is that we'll help other people do the same, follow him. So, here's a couple of things that I've learned about evangelism or witnessing or sharing your faith. Basically, five places to fish. The first is the pond, the second is a stock pond, third is the river, fourth is the swamp, and then the tributaries. So let's take a look at each one and I'll kind of illustrate them. First is the pond. This is where you work, live, and play. It's your co-workers, the guys on your soccer team, fellow students in your classroom, family members, neighbors. This is the people that you work, live, and play with. Uh, a pond, when I first, the first time I ever shared the gospel, I shared the gospel with this young guy, and then actually another guy was eavesdropping as I was sharing. And the next day, I had no luck with the guy that I was talking to, but the next day, the guy that was eavesdropping came up to me and said, "Hey, I did what you told me to do. I received Christ." And it was almost purely by accident, but this is a person that I was working with. So an example of where you work, live, and play. Second is the stock pond. This is where religious people naturally go. Jesus, when he was traveling on the Sabbath, he would always go to the synagogue, or during the festivals, he'd go to the temple. This is where religious people hang out. Paul practiced the same strategy, the synagogue strategy. Go where religious people go. Paul, even when there wasn't a synagogue, went to find the religious place. Like in Philippi, he went down to the river where there was a place of prayer, led Lydia to Christ. Or in Athens, he went to Mars Hill where all the idols were, and there was a statue to the unknown God. So Paul made it a habit of going to these places where religious people would hang out. Deb and I, for 30 years, attended chapel, and we'd sit in the back pew waiting for the guys that would roll out of their bunks after a Saturday night drunk and want to do a Sunday morning repentance. And so we'd pick some of these guys up. And it was very interesting that we ran into this one guy. He'd been in church all his life, and he was really excited about all the things that he had learned in church and everything, and was talking to us about it. And then I said, "Well, how does Jesus fit into all of that?" And no kidding, there was about 2 minutes of silence. And then finally he said, "I don't know." We shared the bridge illustration with him, and he came to Christ. So spiritually hungry people hang out in religious places, and that's good fishing. That's what I call a stock pond. The third one is the river. And a river is kind of a public place where lots of people would go by you, but the key factor is that they would be able to identify you as a believer or a follower of Jesus as they're kind of flowing by you. An example of this was at airborne school. We used to stand on the sidewalk in the mess hall. The soldiers would exit, and then they had to come by the chapel to go back to the barracks. And we would stand on the sidewalk saying, "Hey, we got Bible study tonight. We got pizza, soda, and no push-ups." So, anyways, we'd talk to 400 guys in one night and invite 60 people out to, or 60 people would show up to Bible study. So that's an example of a river. Another example is having your quiet time in a public place, coffee shop or food court. I have my quiet time in Starbucks every day. I actually, one young lady named Davina came up and sat down, and we just baptized her recently. But we got to introduce her to Christ, and she was already on the way. She had met a guy who had introduced her, and then we just continued the process, and she came to Christ and was just baptized. So The river is this idea where lots of people flowing by you, and they can identify you as a Christian. They'll just either stop and talk, or you engage them. The next area is the swamp, and this is the toughie. I think this is cold turkey evangelism. I walked the streets of Highland Falls, New York, for 3 months, and saw one guy come to Christ and aggressively shared the gospel. Now you can find fish in the swamp, but it's pretty difficult to fish out of the swamp. But you can find them there. And then last is the tributary. And these tributaries are just these rivulets that flow into every single one of these places, the rivers, the ponds, the swamps. And what's so important about this is these symbolize the person's natural relational network. And so when you catch a fish, you send that fish back up the tributaries in order to catch more fish. And so when you lead a person to Christ, they know a lot of non-Christian friends and family members, and so they're really excited about their faith, and so they go and tell somebody else, and oh, by the way, their lives are radically transforming before these people's eyes, and they're wondering what's happening. And so a good example of that was I fished Danny out of a relationship that I had with another guy, Jay Castrugo, networked Danny James, a lab tech, to me. And then Danny met a guy named Steven, and then Steven recruited Josh, and Josh recruited Thomas, and the chain just kept going and going. And it was because of these relationships. It wasn't necessarily because of this cold turkey confrontation or a work relationship. It was more about the relationships that had already been established, and that person had credibility, and it just started a chain reaction. That is the most effective way to fish, is through the tributaries. I think the second one is the stock ponds. Go to religious places where religious people hang out. They're already hungry, and you can fish out of chapel or church or whatever. So anyways, those are some things that I've learned about evangelism here in the last 3 years, and hopefully that's helpful. And go fishing. Your father's fishing. Go fishing with him.